Turning your Bibles to the Book of Proverbs. The vast majority of the passages we'll look at are going to come out of the Proverbs. I want to spend a few weeks, and we did it last time I preached, was about 2 weeks ago, and talking about wisdom and how wisdom works and what wisdom looks like. And as you go through Proverbs, one of the reflections of whether or not you're a wise man is the way that you deal with anger and anger issues in your life. Many years ago, I was a student at Freed-Hardeman, and I got to go home, and so that means it was either Thanksgiving or Christmas, because that was about it for me. And it was a pretty good drive back then. It was down interstate and such, but from Freed-Hardeman to Odessa, Texas was approximately 14 hours, and so it took a good while to travel through that area. And I got home, and it was time for church, met my parents at church. And of course, I was talking to my dad in the, well, it wasn't quite the back pew, but near the back. And the reason I tell you this story, I was talking, it was during I guess it was a Sunday night class of some sort. And we had a preacher. He's a really good preacher, but he was one of those high-strung preachers. I know you've never seen one of those. But he was a high-strung preacher that would always turn red while he was preaching and kind of yelled a lot and that sort of thing. He saw me talking. And for some reason, that made him angry. Oh, well, I guess every preacher gets angry when somebody talks during their sermon. So he picked up a pen and he threw it at me, hard as he could. Well, I was young, still had reflexes back in that day, and I ducked, and it hit an 80-year-old lady right behind me in the face. And he still, to this day, blames me for ducking. And, and I blame him for his anger issues that he has. You get in trouble, you get angry, and you think you're going to fix a problem by striking out somebody, and when that person ducks, then you've got issues as well. Oftentimes, I get opportunity to do marital counseling, which is one of my favorite premarital counseling. Marital counseling is not as fun. Premarital counseling is great. You sit down with a future husband, future wife, and they are starry-eyed, and it's just wonderful listening to them. In the inventories, which usually I use, one of the questions there that you have to answer 1 to 5 on is, nothing my spouse ever will do will make me angry. And you would not believe how often the people will mark, that will never happen to me. I will never be angry with my spouse. It is crazy to see how many people will say that. And one thing that we oftentimes will talk about that is when you're married, and probably in every situation, you've got to realize you're going to fight. Now, these families that have been married for 50 years, they'll tell you at the dinner party that they're having at the celebration, we have never had a fight in 50 years. You know how you never have a fight in 50 years? You redefine what a fight is. People will oftentimes have conflict. It may not be yelling. It may not be, being cruel to one another, throwing a pen at church at somebody. But you deal with conflict somehow. And as you deal with conflict, you've got to do it in a wise way, a good way, and a helpful way. When you're in conflict, you need to find not just the me, but the we, the way in which you can make it where it pleases both people on the path forward. That's what we're talking about tonight when we think about anger, is the idea of being angry, but making it in a constructive way. Now, we all know 1 Kings chapter 3, you read about Solomon. Here he is, he's dreaming. God appears to him in a vision and says, I'll give you anything that you want. Do you want lots of wives and lots of relationships? Do you want lots of money? Do you want lots of power? What is it as a king? What is the goal of what you want? I am the God of Israel, God would say. And so as the king of my people, I'm going to give it to you. And we know from reading the passage, Solomon says, Lord, I want wisdom. I want to know how to rightly judge the people as they come in and as they go out. I want to know how to lead your people in the correct way. And that wisdom of knowing how to manage people, how to manage things, how to manage life is the key to success to you and I even today. If you want to rise in your business practices, you need to learn how to manage situations. If you want to do well in school, especially if you want to do well in college, you've got to manage whatever it is that's placed in front of you. If you want to do well in your family, you need to learn how to deal with folks and how to manage conflict and other situations which are there. And so you cannot be a wise person until you know how to deal with anger and know how to deal with conflict. And so let's talk about the dangerous power that comes with anger and the danger that anger presents to every single one of us if we do not handle it correctly. Anger is the dynamite of the soul. And that dynamite can either disintegrate it, destroy it, or if used in a proper surgical way, can build it up and shape it the way it needs to go. But anger, when it's not controlled, when anger just comes to us naturally, when we finally just get filled up with it, anger can be one of the most dangerous things that can happen to you. 3 ways it destroys us. First of all, physically. High blood pressure, heart disease, mental issues, physical ailments, all these sort of things oftentimes come because we do not deal with stress, we do not deal with anger in a very healthy way. Proverbs chapter 14 and verse 30, that passage says, "A sound heart is life to the body, but envy and anger can be rottenness to the bones." When you have anger and you don't know how to deal with it, when you even don't show the anger on the outside because you've been told by your parents or whoever you're not allowed to be angry, and so you press it into your body, it destroys who you are. And that's a health issue for many people, that they do not know how to let off anger. They don't know how to let off those things in their heart which are so tight and can destroy them. Anger is harder on the body than any other emotion. Another way that anger can be dangerous, it can destroy your community. It can destroy the people that you're around, the people that you associate with. How many people have lost jobs because they had a fit? Their anger caused them to say something or do something that they didn't want to do. And if they could go back, oh boy, would they change it. How many people have destroyed marriages because they did not know how to deal with their anger? How many people have hurt their children? Not talking about physical abuse, although that's included, but in raising your children, you were not the mother or father that you needed to be because you did not know how to deal with anger, did not know how to deal with discipline. Proverbs 15:18, "A wrathful man will stir up strife, but he who is slow to get angry is one who increases cooperation." Words can be weaponized, and there are times where when we are in conflict, instead of looking to the solution, we look to win. There are times where when we're associated with somebody and our blood gets up, our anger gets up, our ire gets up, we end up hurting things that we really, truly love. We destroy those things that we see to be so very special. So often, we hurt the community that we're in, the friends that we're around, because of the anger which happens in us. And anger causes us to not make wise choices. We get so angry that we end up doing dumb stuff. Sometimes when we're working out in the shop, working on a car, we get so aggravated that it seems like the only tool we need at this moment is a hammer. Then after a little bit, you realize maybe a screwdriver would have been better. But you're so angry that you have to put out that pressure on something. And you make choices which are not good. Years ago, I used to work in a prison ministry in Parchman, Mississippi. Kind of a scary place. You hear all these things about Parchman and all the things which happen in there. You know, the vast majority of people in prison are not any different than us. You think of them as being just terrible, violent people. And in many cases, that's true. But when you find them in a place where they're not angry anymore, when you find them in a place where they're past that raised blood pressure area, they're really just the same as us. They just made some decisions in the wrath of the moment that were not good. And because of that, they're paying for their sins. Proverbs 19:19. A man of great wrath will suffer punishment. And if you rescue this man, that's Proverbs 19:19, if you rescue this man, get ready because it won't be long until you have to rescue him again. How many times can we be rescued? And yet we don't learn how to deal with our anger and with our wrath. And it gets us in the exact same place where we were before. In many ways, anger can be consuming. We get so angry that it fills our day, and we just keep thinking about the situation which happened, and it keeps escalating in our heart. Sometimes anger can become addictive. And it gets to the point where it has to be in our heart because our heart feels empty without it. Because when somebody has wronged us, when somebody has done something to us, it fills us with so much that there's really nothing else left in life except what happened to us in the past. A lot of people dealing with divorce are filled with that addictive, consuming anger which is there. A lot of times when a person loses a spouse, or a person loses a job, or a person is treated unfairly, they're consumed with what's happened and they're angry. Sometimes it's towards God, sometimes it's towards someone else, sometimes it's even toward themselves. And if they don't learn how to deal with that anger, it changes who they are. And it can drive them away from God, away from people who love them, and away from the person that God has wanted them and made them to be. That's why anger is so very, very important to deal with. But as we talk about this, let's go to our next point, because we're going to talk about the basic goodness of anger. You don't hear many sermons about that, do you? But there's sometimes when anger is a good thing. And there's sometimes that you and I perhaps sin. We don't go in the direction which God wants us to go because we're not angry enough. Anger is created by God. Anger is given to us by God for a purpose. And when we've learned as a young child just to hold everything in and never show it, we don't do what we should. When we become so callous to life and whatever anybody says to us and whatever anybody does to us, it just rolls off. We're not being what God wants us to be. That preacher who threw that pen at me, he had a sermon on anger. Not saying he listened to his sermon, but he had a sermon on anger that I remember, oh man, now that's longer ago than I wish it was. And it was called Setting the Thermostat. And he talked about how there are times where we preach so much that in anger, you've got to turn down the thermostat. Don't be so angry. Don't be so angry. Turn down that heat. Whenever you're feeling something, realize you're going to make a bad decision. Turn down that thermostat. But he also said in that sermon, there's sometimes God expects that thermostat to rise up. And there are times where God wants you and I as a Christian to be angry, to have wrath, to not settle for what life is doing and how things are going. There are times where we should be angry because anger has a goodness. Now, of course, you have one end where you shouldn't go. That's the temper tantrum. But the other end where you shouldn't go is where you're never angry. Where you allow anybody and anyone to say or do anything to you and you never have a negative reaction. That's not God's desire. You're special, created in the image of God, and you deserve a level of respect. There are times where we want to be so polite as a congregation, as the Lord's church, that when we see false worship, when we see people who are splitting the Lord's church, when we see people who are stomping on the blood of Christ, we're not angry enough. We're not filled with wrath enough. It doesn't hurt us in the same way in which it hurts Jesus. And because of that, it shows that we don't treasure the gospel the way that we should. We don't treasure the Lord's church the way that we should. We don't treasure God's things the way that we should. And so understand, I'm not saying to throw the temper tantrum because that's taking the thermostat the wrong way, but there are times in your life where you should be angry. And that's okay. Because that is the way that God made you. Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 28. Look at me leaving Proverbs. Ephesians 4 and verse 28. Be angry. That's a command. Be angry, but sin not. And don't let the sun go down on your wrath. Paul says there are times where you need to be angry, but when you're angry, you better be controlled. Don't let the devil cause you, because of good intentions, to hurt the body of Christ and to hurt someone to whom Christ died for. The Bible says be angry, but don't stay in it long term. Don't let that sun go down on your wrath. Don't let your life be filled with it for a long period of time. When you're angry, deal with the situation and then let go and let God take care of the rest. Psalm 103, verse 8. The Lord, that's God, is a God, if you look at the end of that verse, is a God who is slow to wrath. What we see here is God does get angry. God does judge, but he doesn't do it quickly. My brethren, let each one of you be quick to listen, but slow to speak, slow to become angry. In Exodus 34, as God is introducing himself once again to Moses, he says, I want you to realize, as God, I am slow to anger. And so the good anger is one that doesn't just pop off. The good anger is one that's not just immediate. The good anger is one that is controlled. And the good anger is the anger that's about the right reason. Think about Jesus. And there's primarily three passages where we see his anger. We're not going to spend a lot of time in the Greek. But the Greek is pointing to almost a rage that Jesus has. The way in which it speaks, the ancient languages oftentimes did not really define emotion, it defined the body. And so this word for anger means his nostrils are flaring. Okay? There's enough anger where there's a lot of heavy breathing, a red head which is going on. It's like people at the Cowboys game. Oh, what are they doing? 3 times Jesus became angry. We know that first time, John chapter 2. John chapter 2, Jesus saw the temple. And he knew what the temple represented. It represented a place where all of Israel could come and worship God. It represented God being here on this earth. In many ways, the temple represented who Jesus truly is. It was a forerunner of Jesus. But he saw where people were taking the temple and perverting it for their own purpose. They were abusing other people. They were taking money from other people to enrich themselves and making it hard for people to come to God. And when Jesus saw this, he became furious. And of course, he did in the beginning of the book of John and the end of the book of John, he cleared out that area. And as he overturned the tables and as he sent the money changers out, the apostles were shocked that their Messiah, their rabbi, who always seemed so controlled and so wise, could be so eaten up with anger. And it reminded them of the book of Psalms, where it says, your zeal, O Lord, has filled me, has consumed me. Jesus was angry. He didn't remain angry, but he saw the situation and he took care of it. Another time that we see the anger of Jesus is Mark chapter 3. And in Mark chapter 3, Jesus sees a person who needs to be healed. And as he's talking to this person, he notices the religious leaders who are around him, and he recognizes there's somewhat of a trap going on here. These people were angry because they were upset about what Jesus was saying. Jesus was talking about being able to forgive sin. Jesus was talking about himself having equality with God. And as Jesus looked around, he realized these people did not really love God. They loved themselves. They loved their authority. They loved their power. And their pride and ego made him angry, to where his nostrils flared once again. In John chapter 11, as Jesus was preparing to raise Lazarus, he looked around and once again, lack of faith, the way people treated one another, Jesus became angry. Now we look at those three situations and we see it in light of the passage in Ephesians 4. Be angry, sin not, don't let the sun go down on your wrath. Jesus was angry and he dealt with the situation at that time. Jesus was angry, but he handled the situation forcefully, but he did not sin and he did not put people down. He was angry, but he dealt with the situation rather than dealing with personality. You see that as you go through. Our strength or our anger is full of strength, but it's not sinful. So here's the question. When's the last time you were angry? Maybe cutting a little bit deeper, when's the last time you were angry spiritually? You can barely turn on the TV without people acting in a way in which Sodom and Gomorrah would be embarrassed. You can hardly go through life without seeing someone in our culture and time being oppressed. You can hardly spend much time anywhere without hearing false doctrine, which will not allow people to go to heaven, to be espoused. When's the last time you were angry? Have we become numb to the world? And have we become numb with how people treat us and treat the Lord's church? Many times we allow sin in our life because we rationalize it. Many times we allow sin in our life because we're just so used to it and maybe we feel weak and helpless. Many times we allow sin in our life because maybe we don't really even care. God put anger as an emotion within us, and that emotion needs to be handled. Now, along with that, let's remember why anger can be so dangerous. Anger can go wrong. Proverbs 24, beginning of verse 28, do not be a witness against your neighbor without cause, for why would you deceive with your lips? Do not say, I will do to him just as he done to me. I will render to that man according to his work. Why is anger so dangerous? Because it's so easy to have the wrong response. It's so easy when we are filled with anger to not think rationally and either go too high or too low with the response that we have to other people. It's easy to misappropriate anger. There are some times where when we're mistreated at work, we become so angry, but instead of trying to fix that problem there, we end up going home and taking it out on family members. There's some times where issues that happen within the Lord's church among God's people are not because of what's happened in church, but because of what we brought in from the outside and our reacting to someone who we feel cannot get the same revenge against us. Augustine, who was, as we call a church father, he lived just a few centuries after Christ. He was a bishop, an elder of one of the churches in North Africa, a city called Hippo. And he wrote a book called The Churches of God. And if you ever have to read that book, God bless you. You need to be angry because, oh my goodness, it's a tough book. But in this book, he talks about the disordered life. And of course, it turns out to be kind of an autobiography of him. But as he talks about this disordered life, it kind of applies towards anger. Now, it's not distorted, disordered, D-I-S, it in order, O-R-D-E-R-E-D. Got way too many school teachers in here for me to be spelling stuff. This disordered life And he has 3 keys to it, and he has 3 levels to it. The first level is, he says, a disordered love creates disordered anger. Let me explain that. When you love the wrong things, you get angry about the wrong things. Think about the book of Jonah. We never covered chapter 4 because chapter 4 is not as much fun and we don't have the big fish and all this other stuff. Jonah has preached to the city of Nineveh, a city, the capital of Assyria. In 2 Kings, it looks like the city has already killed some people in Jonah's region. He's probably lost a few cousins of these folks. He does not like Assyrians. He does not like the people of Nineveh. God sends him to go preach to them, and he doesn't want to, but he finally does an 8-word sermon, and wouldn't you know it, they repented. Jonah knows these people must be evil, so he stands on a hill, sits on a hill, and he's watching. Jonah, bless his heart, is one of the 4 people in the Bible who are bald. That's a different sermon. And the sun is bearing down. So God, in his grace, has a vine come up, big leaves, it protects Jonah, makes it where he doesn't get burned, protects him. That night, the Lord sends a worm, and that worm eats that vine, and Jonah is angry. How in the world could God let that happen? And God comes back to him, and he says, you're angry about the vine, but not angry about all these souls who are about to be destroyed. Why are you angry about one and not the other? That's where the book ends. I wish we had a Jonah chapter 5. The reason I bring that up, you ever notice how sometimes we major in minor and minor in majors? We get upset at church because of the color of the pews, because of the thermostat. We get upset at church about what time we're meeting or how we're meeting or whatever in the world it may be. What somebody sat in our pew, somebody took our parking spot. There's a whole list of things that people get upset at church about. When's the last time we were upset when somebody fell away from the Lord's church? When's the last time we were upset because someone's not growing spiritually, their needs are not being met? When's the last time we were upset because there's not enough evangelism going on? Disordered love causes disordered anger. Do you truly love the things of God? That cures a lot of the worldly anger that we face. And that's a little bit of what's going on here in the cities of God, according to Augustine. Number 2, disordered proportions. Sometimes anger is uncontrollable. Something small sets us off, and then it's just a raging fire, as the book of James would tell us. Our response needs to be ordered according to what it is that's made us angry. And we have to be controlled people in that situation. Number 3 is disordered in its goal. You have a child, let's say, and this young child breaks one of the rules which is there. The child needs to be disciplined. Have you ever found yourself or found someone else who disciplines much more greatly than what the offense was? Have you ever had 2 kids in the back seat of the car? I assume kids still do this. They did when they were in my car. Where one will touch the other and say, I touched you, and the other one will just exist, and it makes the other one mad. And they just go back and forth, and what's it do? It starts escalating to the point where someone is crushed, someone almost dies, or at least they pretend like they almost die. It escalates. That happens to adults too. And we have to watch how we discipline our children. We have to watch how we treat other people. We have to learn that there are times where the most graceful thing to do is to forgive and to forget. A disordered love causes anger to go to the wrong place. Now, of course, with Augustine saying these things, there's also levels of disorder. And as he talks about these levels of disorder, there are, the first thing, things that make us angry every single day. They happen every day. If you're ever trying to drive to Nashville, have lots of gas and lots of snacks. It's going to take you a good while to get there. For some reason, I-24 going into Paducah, You need lots of gas, lots of snacks, because it seems like they're always backed up, right? For some reason, at the four-way there, next to CVS Pharmacy, nobody yet has figured out that there's not a stop sign if you pull out there on Main Street. They always stop, don't they? Those things make you angry. It's a daily thing that we have to learn how to deal with. But there's a higher level of disorder, according to Augustine. Number 2, levels of things that we can't forgive and forget. When someone wrongs us and it just dwells within us, and it boils, and it boils, and it boils, and it grows, and it causes us to take it out on other people. It causes us to take it out on ourselves. It causes us to not be the person that God created us to be. And the third level of disorder, according to Augustine, is the times in which we think we need things more than we need God. There are times where we get angry because of a job. We get angry because of a grade at school. We get angry about this or that or whatever else. And it begins to consume us because we forget what really is most important. Knowledge that God's going to take care of us. Knowledge that God is going to be there. All right, the important stuff. Let's go to our last point. Last slide here. We see that anger is natural. We see that anger is dangerous. Let's talk about healing from anger. If you have this boiling in your heart, if you have an issue within you that seems like it cannot be controlled, if you're that guy throwing that pen at church, how do you heal? How do you become what God has created you to be? First of all, you've got to admit that you need to change. And you have got to do whatever it takes to change. Hebrews chapter 12, I was reading this a few days ago, and I ended up putting it in my sermon. We read in Hebrews 12 about how we have to avoid that root of bitterness that's in our heart. Now, around our house, we have put in some flower gardens. And as I was putting in this flower garden and working with it, we had a crepe myrtle, and that's not always been my favorite tree. I don't hate crepe myrtles, but, it's not what I wanted there. So we pulled it up, and I even dug after I pulled it up to try getting rid of the roots and everything else. Every year, a crepe myrtle comes right back because there's a root somewhere down there that I didn't take the time to get out. And I poison it, I cut it. Every year it comes back in a little bit different spot. It's another part of the root coming. Now, to tell you about my weakness in floral gardening, I do that for a reason. When you allow there to be a root of bitterness within your heart, it is going to come back. It may look different, but it will come back. And until you truly heal, until you truly dig those roots out, dig that plant out, and make sure it is gone, it's still going to be there. So you've got to heal. You've got to do whatever it takes to get that root out of your heart. Secondly, closely related, know why you're angry. What is it that makes you angry? We read that in Proverbs 24, 28 through 29 a little bit earlier. God comes to Jeremiah, and Jeremiah is super angry. It's about chapter 45. And God tells Jeremiah, your issue is you're seeking great things for yourself. God's answer for that is, don't do that. It's kind of a simple answer, simplistic, isn't it? But it's true. Many times the level of our anger depends on the level of our ego. Sometimes our ego is expressed not in just our pride, but in our plan of how we think life should go. When anger shows up, find out why it is in your heart that you're truly angry. What is it going on in your heart? And number 3, transform your anger. Change it from something which destroys you to something which helps you to grow. Transform that anger which is there. Proverbs 15:1, a soft answer turns away wrath. A harsh word can stir up anger. Proverbs 25, looking at verse 21, And you might have heard somebody who quoted this, Proverbs 25:21. If your enemy is hungry, give him something to eat. If your enemy is thirsty, give him something to drink. For in so doing, you'll heap coals of fire upon his head, and the Lord will reward you. Seek the good of your neighbor. Seek for his improvement. Now, I used to like that passage of Romans 12 about pouring the coals upon someone's head. You know, that's some way to get somebody back, wasn't it? That passage is really talking about pouring coals upon the issue, throwing whatever it is you have in the fire so it can be burned up and done with. When you pray for your enemy every single day, that person won't remain your enemy for long. When you truly learn to forgive and you put that into action by being good to that person, that will change that anger that's in your heart. When you have sympathy, empathy, you remember all those words we used to bring out, it shows grace. It shows love. It shows that you truly believe in God. And so what I'm calling for us to do tonight is I'm calling for us to deal with anger and with rage. And I want you to see that it's not always bad. There are times where God has designed you to be angry. But when you're angry in that way, keep it controlled, do not sin, and keep it short. Don't let the sun go down on that wrath. Don't let your anger define who you are. I want us tonight to realize that anger can be very dangerous. It's dynamite. And many times our anger ends up hurting us physically, community-wise, spiritually, more than it is the person we're angry with. What I want us to do tonight is to deal with that root of bitterness, to deal with the issues that are within our heart, to find a way to forgive as God forgives, to find a way to truly live life as God would have you to live, to finally be the kind of person God created you to be. Anger. It may put more people in hell than fornication, than drunkenness and lying. But anger, used properly, will help us to be God's people. Anger, worked through in the right way, will help you be the person God has created you to be.